Hey guys, Relius here, and welcome to Relius's World. In this episode, and probably the next few episodes, I'll be reading from a short story book that I've written called Survival. The book is basically... each chapter is a short story, based on different characters from roleplays in, well, basically apocalypse settings, which is why it's called Survival. They span from many different ones that I've done over the years, so some of my writing may not be the greatest, but they do get better, at least in my opinion. Also a disclaimer before I begin reading. I've already tried to read this once, so this is my second try, and I'm not the best reader when it comes to being out loud, but I'll get used to it. So I hope you enjoy this book, and actually, I should explain what this chapter is, because this one has some backstory that's separate from the others. This short story is not exactly the most creative title, but it's Lucas Campbell and the Brass Sharks. The main character is Lucas Campbell, as the title implies, who is the president of the Brass Sharks Antique Manufacturing Company. It was a company that was around before the War of Anarchy, which is a roleplay on Discord, a long gone roleplay now, but it was situated in Portland, Maine, and belonged to Lucas Campbell and a couple other characters that will be said in the story, where a lot of it's actually explained in the story itself now that I think about it, but Lucas controlled the whole roleplay Anarchy basically takes place after the world's Fourth World War, and this Fourth World War caused the apocalypse, a nuclear one, sort of like Fallout, which a lot of the roleplay is inspired by. And out of the ashes rose one of the few remaining cities, Portland, Maine, where the Brass Sharks and some other smaller factions teamed up to work together for their people instead of fighting over the different turf of the city. From there, they grew into the Brass Sharks, which they just took the name Brass Sharks because I wasn't as creative with having a new name. But anyway, Lucas became the president, basically, of this small city-state, I guess you could call it. And from there, Brass Sharks ended up controlling about half of the East Coast by the end of the roleplay, before it died. So, I'd say it's fairly successful. But I won't speak any further, and I'll get right to the story. If you want any more information, you can contact me on Discord, and I can tell you all about it, because I'm a lot better at writing than I am at speaking. Lucas Campbell and the Brass Sharks. This world is so confusing. If only it was a bit simpler. Lucas woke up in his home one morning. He had woken up to the sound of sparks, but thought his wife, Sarah, was just tinkering on a machine. "Good morning, hon," Sarah said, a smile on her face. Her eyes told a different story. "Morning, Sarah," Lucas replied, smiling back. He got up and looked out the window of the room at the remains of an old city of Maine, Portland to be exact. The city had been mostly abandoned from the war, but some was still functioning. The sky was cloudy. It was sprinkling. Lucas felt a tap on the back of his head and turned around, only to see Sarah. "You could have tapped my shoulder," he teased. Sarah only chuckled nervously. "Yeah, guess so." "What's wrong?" Lucas asked, tilting his head slightly. Nothing, just remembered something. You need to get to work, Sarah replied, changing the subject. Lucas nodded slowly. He had caught her doing weird things lately. Whenever he would ask, she would try to change the subject on him. He kissed her on the forehead, then walked to the armoire. He opened the doors and took out his suit, taking off his pajamas. He put on the clothes, getting his hat on last. His clothes included a light brown trench coat that ran about mid-thigh, a black dress jacket with silver designs, and a silver-gray dress shirt underneath. He wore navy blue dress pants and shiny black dress shoes. His hat was an officer's hat, with a brass shark symbol on it, a hammer and clamp crossing each other over a cog. He walked out of the room and down the stairs. Deciding to skip breakfast, he walked out the front door and onto the sidewalk. He walked for a few minutes before seeing his car, a jet-black 1931 McLaughlin Buick car fitted with a muscle car motor underneath its hood. He took out a crank from his pocket and started the car, putting the crank back in. The car roared to life and he got in the driver's seat, pulling out of the parking spot. He drove down the road, looking for any of the city's factions. He had an idea for the city's factions to team up and form one large faction that would work together. He himself was a part of the Brass Sharks. The other factions in Portland were the Air Pirates, who had taken the airport when the war left the world in ruin, the Atlantic Federation, who had taken the Ferry Village, and the Maine Preservation Foundation, which had taken control of the Old Port, West Bayside, East End, and downtown districts. The Brass Sharks had taken Deering and Deering Center districts. Lucas parked outside of the airport, waiting for the leader of the Air Pirates to come out of the terminal. He stopped the car as he leaned in the back seat, crossing his arms and looking at the door. A few minutes later, the leader walked out of the door nearest to the car. He wore a greasy white shirt, cargo pants, and a jean jacket with the sleeves torn off. He had jet black hair, which fit his position if somebody thought about it, and wore it short, like a military haircut, but a little bit longer. Lucas rolled down the window of the car. "Hello, Mr. Watson." The man, Watson, nodded a greeting back. "Morning. What do you need?" "I was wondering if you would like to merge with my faction for more control over the city. Kind of like working together to control more area. Both of our factions could use the airport for travel. I was also thinking of speaking to the Atlantic Federation and the MPF," Lucas answered. Watson nodded, thinking for a moment. "I'll consult my members and get back to you." "All right, that's a better answer than I thought I would get," Lucas chuckled. Watson gave a light laugh, then turned around and walked inside. Lucas continued his drive to Ferryville. He drove down Musey Street and to the old National Guard base, which the Atlantic Federation took over. The base was in good order, still well kept even after the war. It had a barbed wire top fence around the land side. There were guards patrolling the perimeter on makeshift platforms built behind the fences, and more on the roofs of buildings. The leader, named Jackson Grace, stood outside with two of his captains, waiting for Lucas. They watched as the car drove up the road into the short driveway of the base. Lucas got out of his car as he parked in front of the men. He got out and walked to the front of it, tipping his hat to the three. He got a good look at him, looking for any weapons just in case. Jackson was tall, wearing a sailor's captain rank uniform, except for the hat. He wore his hair somewhat long, its blonde strands blowing in the slight breeze. The other two men looked similar, in private rank uniforms. "Good morning, Mr. Campbell," Jackson said. "Hello, Mr. Grace. I bet you already know what I'm going to ask," Lucas replied. "Yes, I do. I accept your request to merge factions, as long as we have representatives for decisions related to the port system," Jackson announced. "You will be in charge of the port, except you would need to give copies of records to the City Hall," Lucas said. Jackson nodded, agreeing. He held out his hand to shake, and Lucas stepped forward, shaking his hand. The deal had been made. "It will be a pleasure working with you more, Mr. Grace," Lucas smiled. "Yes, I hope so," Jackson replied. Lucas got back into his car and drove off as Jackson and his men stepped back through the gate. He drove off, heading towards the harbor to the MPF base and the old Maine Narrow Gauge Railroad Company buildings. The buildings were made of brick, an iron gate blocking the entrance into the middle of them. There was a single road going down through, somewhat run down. Windows that had broken were boarded up with various sheets of metal and wooden planks. Lucas spoke with the leaders there, who agreed to merge as well. Lucas drove back to City Hall, where he got a call over his radio immediately. It was the air pirates. "Hello, Mr. Campbell. This is Watson. I have talked with my members and we've decided that we agree. We will be merging with the Brass Sharks. I will be at City Hall shortly," Watson radioed in. "All right, if you would be able to, my good sir, could you gather Jackson and Buck? They agreed as well," Lucas asked. "Yeah, I'll get 'em," Watson replied, disconnecting. 3 weeks later. Lucas stepped out of his office, feeling somewhat out of it. He hadn't been feeling great, so he called his secretary and told her he was heading home. He got up and took one step before blacking out and falling to the floor. Lucas woke up in a hospital bed, confused doctors standing around him. "What's going on? What happened?" Lucas asked. "Well, Mr. Campbell, you took a bad spill," one doctor said, a nervous look on her face. "Oh, I feel fine now," Lucas responded. "I think I'm all right." The doctor shook her head. "I'm afraid I can't let you leave for the time being. You aren't as okay as you think." "What do you mean?" Lucas asked. A woman in a suit walked in with a suitcase. She and Lucas locked eyes. "Knock him out," the man said. "I'm sorry, Mr. Campbell," the doctor said, then injected him with a knockout serum. "What?" Lucas started as he passed out. Lucas woke up in his home with a jump. He was breathing heavily, but he felt off. "What's wrong, hon?" Sarah asked. "I had the most peculiar dream, Sarah," Lucas responded. "What was it about?" "I was in a doctor's office, but instead of feeling sick, I felt fine. Some person in a suit came in and I was knocked out. Then I woke up," Lucas responded. "I don't know what the suit person was doing, but it was weird." "Oh, you're fine, though," Sarah said bluntly. "Yeah," Lucas said slowly. "You are fast to answer." "Oh, sorry," Sarah replied. "Is everything okay?" Lucas asked. "You've been pretty distant lately." "Not really," Sarah answered. "What's wrong? You can tell me." "Well, it's you. You're wrong," Sarah admitted. "What do you mean?" Lucas asked, narrowing his eyes a little. "Well, you're not really how I thought you'd be," Sarah announced. "Sarah, you're confusing me," Lucas said. "You're not entirely human. You still are, but not all the way," Sarah said. "Lucas, my husband, is dead. I got his brain, connected it, along with the salvageable body parts from him, and built a robot cyborg thing using stolen war tech. You're him." Lucas laughed. "That's a funny joke." "I'm telling the truth, Lucas. This is no laughing matter," Sarah said. "Oh, well, I feel human, so until I see that I'm not, I will believe I am," Lucas replied. "All right, just know there might be a day that I can't take keeping this secret anymore," Sarah said, almost on the verge of tears. "Every inventor will eventually hate their invention, and they leave it." Lucas stood up and walked over to her. He hugged her tightly, kissing her on the cheek. "I understand, Sarah." And that is the end of the backstory of Lucas Campbell and the Brass Sharks. I hope you enjoyed it, and that you'll continue listening to this podcast and my slowly developing reading skills. And that's pretty much it. Again, if you have any other questions, you can contact me on Discord or hit me up in the comments on my YouTube channel. Other than that, I guess that's really it because, again, still new to podcasting and I have no other ideas. So, I hope you all have a good day, and this is Really signing out. See you guys.